It's October in 1849, and you're waiting anxiously on the wharfs of the New York harbor. Because, like everyone you know, you are desperate to head west to California and stake your claim in the gold rush. But ahead of you lies an arduous passage. Instead of heading overland, a journey lasting months, you've opted for a different path, scraping together the $400 needed to go by steamship. This route will only take you 40 days, but 8 of them will be spent struggling through the rivers and mountains of Panama, where you'll face lethal diseases, hungry wildlife, and spend more time on the back of a mule than you'd care to. Ugh, there has got to be a better way to get in on this action. Well, you're in luck, because in a few short months, a shipping magnate will set out to build one no matter the cost. Thanks so much to Skillshare for always helping to keep us on track towards learning new things. You see what I did there. In the middle of the 19th century, getting from one side of the continental United States to the other was big business. Californian gold needed to reach the banks of New York, and wealthy migrants wanted a faster and more comfortable route to head out west than the arduous Oregon Trail. Now, the obvious solution was to build a railroad, connecting the vast network of rails on the East Coast with California and the Pacific Ocean. Congress had agreed back in 1847 that it was a good idea, but it would be 16 years before the first tracks of the Transcontinental Railroad would be laid, and 22 years before a train made the first trip from Council Bluffs to Sacramento. So in the meantime, would-be prospectors and entrepreneurs looked to the seas. The quickest route was to board a ship in New York or New Orleans and head south to the Isthmus of Panama. There, they would hire locals to carry them by boat or canoe up the Chagres River, then switch to mules for the mountainous passage to Panama City. But this was hardly better than the dusty trails from St. Louis to San Francisco. "We found the road in a horrid condition," said one traveler. "The mud was 5 feet deep, and we passed dead donkeys being picked clean by vultures." Most of the hotels along the route were little more than log cabins run by unsavory Americans who had driven out their local competitors. But the mud and mules were just inconveniences, for the Panamanian jungle was rife with deadly diseases like cholera and malaria. In fact, life insurance policies even had a special clause that would render them void if the holders ever entered the land of Chagres fever, because there was a real risk that anyone setting out from the Atlantic Ocean would not reach the Pacific. The wealthier of these westward travelers started to demand better, and it was William H. Aspinwall who stepped up to deliver it. Aspinwall descended from men who had come to America aboard the Mayflower and attended the Continental Congress. His younger sister was married to Isaac Roosevelt, whose grandson Franklin would go on to be the 32nd President of the United States. So yeah, Aspinwall was, by any measure, part of the American elite. Turns out he also knew a thing or two about shipping, for his trading company owned the Ann McKim, the Rainbow, and the Sea Witch, the 3 fastest ships in the world. Actually, the Sea Witch was so fast that in 1849, she sailed from Hong Kong to New York in just 77 days, which is a record that wasn't beaten until 2013, so yeah. But in 1848, he handed over the reins of his company to his brother, so he could focus on a new venture, ferrying passengers to California. And his timing couldn't have been better, for with the gold rush raging, hundreds of thousands of people were looking west, and would eagerly pay to get there fast. But the competition in this arena was fierce. For instance, no less a figure than Cornelius Vanderbilt himself, one of the richest men to ever live, set up a chain of steamboats in 1851 to carry passengers through the more temperate waters of Nicaragua. And the traffic was massive. In 4 years, Vanderbilt's steamboats carried over 150,000 people westward to the goldfields. Aspinwall, for his part, thought he could do better. So, in 1850, with $1 million in funding, he headed south to begin work on a railroad across the Isthmus of Panama. But it quickly became clear that Aspinwall and his backers had bitten off more than they could chew. The mouth of the Chagres River was a swamp, home to alligators, malaria, and some of the most toxic trees in the world. Seriously, look these things up, they are nightmare fuel. Plus, it didn't have a port. Aspinwall had to actually build a whole town on stilts just to escape the high tides. But regardless, thousands of laborers were shipped in to build the railroad. Men came or were sent from as far afield as Ireland, Jamaica, and Australia to be paid as little as 40 cents a day for backbreaking work. Then, when the project started to run behind, Aspinwall had his super-fast Sea Witch bring in thousands of indentured Chinese laborers who were treated little better than slaves. And it cannot be understated how terrible the working conditions were. With few machines and pack animals to help them, the workers did everything by hand. Mile upon mile of vines and creepers were hacked back with machetes. Hardwood trees 10 yards wide were cut down with nothing but axes and then hauled away by sweating workmen. The first miles of the railroad had to be laid on wooden pilings driven into the sand by men standing up to their chests in swampy water, and all of this surrounded by mosquitoes, sandflies, and what one visiting writer described as, quote, the perpetual warm bath of the hot, moist climate, unquote. It took almost 2 years for the railroad to advance just 8 miles inland. By the end of 1851, Aspinwall had spent his $1 million and had also seen hundreds of laborers die from yellow fever and cholera. Not to mention, thousands more had left for easier work or simply fled back home. The project seemed doomed, but then something unbelievably lucky happened. In November of 1851, 2 paddle steamers, the Georgia and the Philadelphia, were forced to seek shelter from a hurricane in a nearby bay. Now, the passengers were desperate to get off their ships, and were also willing to pay for their luggage and themselves to be carried along the 8 miles of track that had been laid toward Panama City. After all, that was 8 miles that they didn't have to do by river or donkey. This was the break that Aspinwall's project needed. His company immediately ordered passenger carriages to be shipped from the US, and for the rest of the project, as a side hustle, they ferried migrants from the Atlantic Ocean to as far as the railroad reached. This approach paid off, for by the time the first train ran the full length of the railway in January 1855, over a third of its total cost had been paid off by fares collected during its construction. The Panama Railroad was completed at a cost of $8 million, and it was the most expensive railway in the world at the time, equivalent to over $280 million today. But it cost much more than just money. Historians over the years have found it hard to establish a firm figure, but it seems clear that of the 17,000 men who built the railroad, at least 6,000 of them died of heat and sickness in the abysmal working conditions. Of course, Aspinwall and his investors thought it was worth it, for now it only took 4 hours, not 8 long days, to go from the Atlantic to the Pacific. With the railroad built, it now only took 21 days to travel between New York and San Francisco, while also being in the relative comfort that modern steamships and trains could offer. Between 1848 and 1869, about 600,000 passengers traveled through Panama, the vast majority of them along the railroad. But far more consequential was the freight that it hauled. In the second year of the railroad's opening, $60 million in gold went east, and in total, more than $750 million of gold made the trip across the narrow isthmus. Though it wasn't just gold, mind you. The Panama Railroad opened up the east coast of America, and the whole of Europe really, to the trades of the Pacific. Whale oil, coffee, and silver went one way, and the produce of British mills and East Coast foundries went back. Until the opening of the Panama Canal 60 years later, the Panama Railroad carried more weight of goods than any other railway in the world. The 19th century was the age when distance was defeated. Men with money set their sights on conquering time, drawing the world together with the overwhelming power of commerce. But we should also always remember, like in Panama and so many other places, the price of their ambition was the lives of thousands of workers. Thankfully, since then, labor laws have improved in many places, but there's still just a ton of work to do on that front around the world, because while projects like the Panama Railroad absolutely improved the lives of countless people around the globe, we also need to remember to always strive to protect those who make projects like it possible. And you know, speaking of possible, today's episode is made possible by the world's largest online learning community for creatives, Skillshare. Recently, I've been watching their learning path entitled Go From Idea to Finished Animation as a Beginner. You know, to get a better understanding of all the fantastic work our extra history artists and animators create. And now I'm picking up on things I hadn't gleaned in all of my years of show running this channel, and I'm able to talk to my team in a more clear and efficient way. Because I cannot stress this enough, it is so important in the creator economy, or anywhere really, to always be learning new skills. And Skillshare, the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, freelance, and productivity, is just the best place for that. For instance, say you want to learn how to more effectively market your ideas. Well, they got you covered. Maybe you want to up your photography game. Well, they got tons of classes to learn from there as well. Heck, Perhaps you want to just get out of your comfort zone, but still be pretty comfy. In that case, they have relaxing courses like learning to crochet to scratch that creative itch. There is just so much you can learn from Skillshare, and right now is the best time to get started. Because the first 500 people who use our link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Bam! So to start learning a new skill today, again for free, click here. And then once you've leveled up, come on back and check out another of our videos here. A legendary thanks to Kuya Koi, Joseph Blame, Izzy Coin, Hunter Z, Dominic Valenciana, Arcolite Games, and Angelo Valenciana for being fantastic legendary patrons.